Attention, duped masses!
You're listening to Media Monarchy with James Evan Pilato.
Airstrike mistakes, refugee distribution, and rape riots. Plus this day in history with Charles and Diana's divorce and our song of the day by Mogwai on your Morning Monarchy for August 28th, 2017. I'm James Evan Pilato from MediaMonarchy.com. Welcome to wherever you are. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us for another independent, non-commercial, alternative broadcast. I've been Media Monarchy since 9/11/05. Our 12th anniversary is creeping right up, and it's all thanks to you. All thanks to our supporters. MediaMonarchy.com/support. That keeps us moving and grooving. I hope you had a fantastic, safe, and productive and awesome weekend. We did here on our end. Went to a little record nerd show, as I am apt to do, so I've got a brand new stack of old, amazing 45s and records that we'll be playing for you all week on our daily DJ set at noon. That's called Pump Up the Volume. That comes up a little bit later after your Morning Monarchy. Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 Pacific Time, streaming live at MediaMonarchy.com/listen. Yes, we are having a little bit of site woes still. A little bit of gremlins. So still working under the hood, and actually got my buddies Mike and Summit. They are on the case. Hope to pretty much make action all happen this week. I worked on it over the weekend and made some updates, and hopefully you actually should see in your RSS feed. It should be a little faster, a little bit cleaner. Seems like a bit of the problems coming from people all say iTunes, iTunes, iTunes. So we're looking on reloading it and resubmitting it to iTunes if we have to. And we're also looking at all the code gremlins within. Again, I kind of feel like, not unfortunately, but it's tough. I got a 12-year-old Frankenstein that I built by myself back in 2005, and it's slowly but surely kind of become outdated in some ways. Doesn't need a lot of updates to happen. So we are working on that behind the scenes, so I'll remind you, we've been putting up your Morning Monarchy episodes pretty much in their entirety up on YouTube. Now, sometimes I have to cut out the songs. Sometimes the songs can make it, and they might end up running ads over top of it, which I apologize for, which is why we're making the move to BitChute. But I can get away with some of the songs. Sometimes the songs, if they're too big, it'll just completely smash the video and nobody will be able to watch it at all. So I'm not sure exactly what that'll mean for this morning's Mogwai. I think I'm going to try and include it. They're on their own label. They started their own label years ago, Rock Action. And they're from Scotland. And we're going to hear a lot of news today from Venezuela and Guatemala and Israel and all around the world. This is a special geopolitics episode. So each day of your Morning Monarchy, and again, we are bright back Monday morning. Hope you're doing well. Insert Mondays are tough gif right here. Each day of your morning show, we focus in on a different area of the news. Monday is world news, and we call it hashtag geopolitics, and we spell it with a K. That's because we can sort of own that hashtag. And if you look at that hashtag, you can find all the other news that we talk about on here, plus the news that is submitted by you. We are not only crowdfunded, but we are crowdsourced. We get our news from you. We get it from Sean, from Ray, from Heather, from Andy, all of you. Huge thanks. I couldn't even begin to start reeling off all the names that should be thanked. So this is your geopolitics edition, the world news edition of your morning show. I was challenged in a way, not in a bad way, by a listener several weeks ago, and they asked a couple of times, and I won't actually recall who it is, unfortunately. Sorry, unless they pop up in the chat here and say, hey, that was me. We are in the chat in Discord. You can find the links to that in the tweets, just like you can find the links to every story we're going to talk about over the next hour over in the tweets. We tweet those show notes out about an hour before showtime. So the show is going to be by listener request. And the request is something that actually, at least the way I'm going to do it, prohibits me from telling you exactly what the request was. It's going to be something very large, in a way, missing from this episode. But I'm not going to tell you what it is. We're just going to do this episode and see if it feels different. See if it feels like there's maybe some looming monster that's not being mentioned, some elephant in the room, so to speak. But you got to stream in live. The other thing I want to remind you of, if you're ever still having woes, our friends at RadioConfluence.com simulcast all your Media Monarchy broadcasts, your morning show, your music show. Huge thanks to RadioConfluence.com, Jared and everybody in the growing community there. As long as the feed's working, you can also get the morning show on the Truth Seeker app and all the other places that are super awesome enough to carry and care about Media Monarchy. So I'll take a brief glance at the breaking lamestream news and point out two things for you. Barcelona attackers evaded checks specifically designed to prevent attacks, which can't help but bring up the question in me, it's much like I know the way other intelligence services work. I wonder if it's a rigged system. I wonder if they're informants. I wonder if they're patsies. I wonder if all that action, all those double, triple agents, I wonder if that has anything to do with it. I can also give you one fact check. It's very important. And it'll actually come into play at the end of this episode on This Day in History a little bit. Prince Charles to be king for 7 years before handing crown to Prince William? Question mark? You can get more on that from Gossip Cop. That sounds almost biblical, doesn't it? Prince Charles, he'll be king for 7 years, and then he'll hand the crown to Prince William. Oh, there'll be some deal for 7 years, but then halfway through it'll be broken. You are listening to Your Morning Monarchy. It is Monday, August 28th. It's the last week of August, so we are going to shut the club down, my friends, and I'm glad you're here. We are streaming live, MediaMonarchy.com/listen. Let's dive in to geopolitics. The Saudi-led coalition has assumed responsibility for the deaths of civilians killed in an airstrike carried out in the Yemeni capital, Sana'a, and said that a technical mistake led to the incident. The coalition spokesman, Colonel Turki al-Maliki, expressed deep sorrow over what he called an unintentional and accidental incident that resulted in, collateral damage. And what have we said a million times? One man's collateral damage is another man's, fact of life. Death is a fact of life in the military war machine. They also expressed sincere sympathy to the airstrike victims' relatives. The state-run Saudi press agency said al-Maliki also said that the coalition forces had completed the investigation into the incident and conducted a comprehensive review of selected military objectives to examine whether they were compatible with international humanitarian law and customary rules of targeting. I imagine most countries would say, it seems like our objectives don't really line up with what you guys say we should do, so we're going to continue to pursue our objectives. He also said that the airstrike was targeting a legitimate military objective, which was the Houthi rebel command center. The coalition was not intentionally targeting residential buildings that were eventually hit in the strike, he added, accusing the Houthis of deliberately using humans, or rather civilians, as human shields by placing their military facilities in residential districts. He then reaffirmed the coalition's, quote, commitment to the full implementation of the provisions of international humanitarian law, especially on the protection of civilians and application of highest standards of targeting, as well as the legal blah-blah-blah, bling-blang-bloom. They don't give a shit. We're really sorry you guys found out we killed a bunch of civilians, so here are our crocodile tears. Please forgive us and we'll move on.
The Saudi-led coalition has long been accused of conducting airstrikes against Houthi targets in Yemen with no regard for how many civilians they kill in the process. On Monday, the Saudi ambassador to the UN pushed back against charges the coalition has been reckless.
The level of casualties is unacceptably high. Any single life lost in this conflict is a life too many. So we would certainly agree with that, and our effort to continuously try to improve our procedures and our conduct of the conflict is ongoing and will not stop.
But then on Wednesday, a coalition airstrike reportedly aimed at a Houthi checkpoint leveled a hotel north of the capital, Sana'a. Dozens of farm workers said to be the victims. As the UN tries to confirm these reports, this reaction.
We have been told on a number of occasions by the coalition that they do their utmost to avoid civilian casualties. What we see continuing in the conflict in Yemen is that the parties to the conflict are inflicting a huge toll on the Yemeni people.
The Saudi-led coalition's airstrikes have been getting the most attention here at UN headquarters, but there's also criticism for the Houthi rebels who control more than half of Yemen's provinces. They've been accused of using civilians as human shields. They've also been accused of denying aid workers the access they need to deliver emergency food and medicine. The UN says the humanitarian crisis in Yemen is the worst in the world, and it's only raised 41% of the money needed for emergency aid. This while a quarter of Yemenis are at risk of starvation and illness. The Russian ambassador to the UN told reporters diplomats are trying to find a way to get the parties back to peace talks, but he says it will be hard.
We are looking forward to and strongly urge all parties to cease the hostilities and to come to the political dialogue, to come at the table without any preconditions. Without that, we will not be able to solve the problem in Yemen.
Even so, results can't come soon enough for Yemenis caught in the middle of civil war. Rosalind Jordan, Al Jazeera at the United Nations.
Those civilian buildings just got in the way of those bombs. Friday's attack targeted the Faj Atan area on the southern outskirts of Sana'a in the early morning and claimed lives of at least 14 civilians, of course including children. 2 residential buildings were reduced to rubble. The incident took place just 2 days after the coalition hit a hotel located in the Yemeni capital, not far from the Houthi checkpoint. That airstrike also killed dozens of people. The attack on the hotel was condemned by the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, which said the Saudi-led coalition was responsible for protecting civilians in Yemen. Coalition actions were also condemned by many human rights organizations. Lynn Malouf, Amnesty International's Middle East research director, called on the UN to look at the evidence. Take action against the Saudis, adding that schools and hospitals lie in ruins, hundreds of young lives were lost to reckless airstrikes. It is interesting how broad of a term civil war has now become. It seems like it's everywhere. The International Committee of the Red Cross condemned Friday's airstrike, calling it outrageous. 8 victims were members of the same family, including 5 kids between 3 and 10 years old. So even when you got Amnesty and the Red Cross, you know you're probably on the wrong side of history. It's probably still murder. And we'll probably have to look at a lot of the receipts of where those things are coming from. Meanwhile, the UN also accused the coalition of carrying out an attack on the Yemeni southwestern Taiz province that killed 20 people, including children. So in the week from August 17th to 24th, 58 civilians were killed, including 42 by the Saudi-led coalition. So we're grabbing this article from RT, and again, everything we say and play will always be included in the show notes. All the links, all the articles, all the stories, all the videos, so you can go continue the research yourself. I, in some ways, just sort of laying out breadcrumb trails, as it were. The coalition, led by Saudi Arabia, has been waging a military campaign against Shia Houthi rebels in Yemen since March 2015 in an attempt to put the ousted Yemeni president back in power. Since the start of the campaign, the coalition has repeatedly been accused of killing dozens of civilians in its airstrikes, but it's rarely taken responsibility for such incidents. That's really the only interesting, different part of this. The fact that they actually claimed responsibility. Now, you'll also notice a lot of companies. That's that Freudian slip. Companies, countries, there's very little difference between the two. They dump out a lot of bad shit on Fridays. A lot of bad things all get dumped out on Friday. It's called dumping day. Talked about that a lot even on Ground Zero. The campaign and Saudi imposed blockade of the impoverished nation has contributed to a humanitarian crisis, major outbreak of cholera. Major outbreak of cholera. What have they said? That it's code black nearly every day in the hospital system there? And they do actually mention at the very end of this RT article, major Western powers, including the UK, have been contributing to the Saudi war effort by selling Riyadh weapons and providing the coalition air missions with refueling and targeting intelligence, which pretty much sounds like everything you would need in a war. I don't know if there's much beyond weapons, the ammo and fuel for them, and how to fly and target them. That's pretty much it. So that's your first ugly headline. Saudi-led coalition admits killing civilians in airstrike in Yemen by mistake. We appreciate you in the chat. Again, we have been in the chat in Discord for the last several months. It's kind of a video game place, but it works well for the chat, and you can also actually listen to the show in Discord. Hey, there's about half a dozen people in there. Appreciate you. Thanks for doing that. It was just noted in the chat, someone got here just in time. Because I'm almost done with all the bad news, right? It's just going to be nothing but good news here on out. I wish. And we're kind of long overdue for a good news next week episode. But we're doing geopolitics, my friends. It is Monday, August 28th, 2017. I'm James Evan Pilato from MediaMonarchy.com with a lot of world news for you. The Israeli government imposed power reductions going on in Gaza. We'll grab this from radiohc.cu, the United Nations Children's Fund. Got a lot of United Nations. United Nations Children's Fund says the power shortages in Gaza have reduced access to water by 1/3 in recent months, in, of course, the midst of a sweltering summer heat wave. The Israeli government-imposed power reductions have also disrupted the functioning of hundreds of water and wastewater facilities, causing the number of waterborne cases of diarrhea to double for children under the ages of 3. United Nations has warned the Gaza Strip has become unlivable for its 2 million residents. So, the headline, Israeli-imposed power shortages in Gaza cut water access by 1/3. Now, as I do with a lot of the stories, I dig around and want to find Want to find clips, want to find news, want to find supplemental bits of information to make this all come together a little more. It's always interesting what you'll find when you dig into the past, and that's why we say past is prologue. That's why our friend Dalai Lama pointed out in this case, past is prologue. Palestinians suffering from food and water shortages and power cuts.
Food and water shortages, power cuts, and a lack of medical supplies are among the harsh daily realities for Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. Known as the world's largest open-air prison, the coastal enclave has been under crippling Israeli blockade for nearly 8 years now. Our correspondent from Gaza, Afsha Shannon, has more.
The situation with power outages and undrinkable water in the Gaza Strip is almost a daily situation for Gaza's population of over 1.7 million. This is happening because of the Israeli blockade that's been taking place for nearly 8 years now, amid what many here call as an international conspiracy of silence. During the Israeli wars in Gaza, water sources were attacked by Israeli warplanes, sewage treatment plants were attacked. This has caused raw sewage to seep into the aquifer of Gaza, polluting the underground water. In addition to the fact that Israel does not allow fuel to get into this blockaded territory and thus preventing the Gaza Salt power plant from producing enough electricity to cater to this blockaded coastal strip. Add to that the fact that the Egyptian military started a crackdown on the tunnels along the border with Egypt following the ouster of Egyptian President Mohammed Morsi, and this led to a situation where no fuel is coming in through the underground tunnels. The tunnels used to bring in badly needed goods, medicine, and fuel for the Gaza Strip, and this line these vital lines were severed by the Egyptian military. And also reports by the United Nations say that by the year 2020, the Gaza Strip will not be livable because the fact that over 95% of Gaza's water is polluted.
Palestinians suffering from food, water shortages, and power cuts. That clip uploaded to YouTube February 6th, 2014. Past is prologue. And we note in the chat, Lebanon hasn't been invaded in a while. I know. Israel looks like they're about to let they're going to let an August go by without invading Lebanon. They only got a couple days left. We also must note in these situations that, again, it's the people that suffer. And this is not about racism. This is about statism. That's the killer. You're listening to the Morning Monarchy Geopolitics Edition, and we are looking all around the world today. So we'll head from Israel and Gaza. So we'll head over to Germany as Chancellor Merkel defended her decision to open German borders in 2015, while also urging EU countries to show solidarity on refugees. In a separate TV appearance, the Chancellor dodged a question about her main rival. Now, it's the headline on this that really just grabs me. This from DW.com. Germany's Angela Merkel says refugees must be distributed fairly. In an interview published on Sunday, German Chancellor Angela Merkel stood by her resolution 2 years ago to provide a refuge to those fleeing from warfare in Syria and other countries. I would take all the important decisions of 2015 the same way again, she said, to avert a humanitarian catastrophe. However, she admitted that EU law at the time had been inadequate for dealing with the enormous refugee influx that ensued. She criticized the so-called Dublin regulation on refugees, which requires those seeking asylum to register in the first EU state they enter. What state might that be? The regulation means that EU countries on the Mediterranean are forced to take in the overwhelming majority of migrants, most of whom come via the sea route. It's unacceptable that Greece and Italy should have to carry the burden alone because they have the geographical location that they do and the refugees land in them, Merkel told the Welt on Sonntag. Instead, refugees should be distributed among the EU member states in solidarity. Calls for redistribution of refugees in the bloc, according to a quota scheme, have previously been met with considerable resistance, particularly from Eastern European countries such as Poland and Hungary. Now, this almost sounds like other conversations we've heard. Talking about spreading the wealth around. We need to redistribute these refugees equally so that everybody can use and abuse them.
Under the cover of night, dozens of migrants cross from Serbia into Hungary. It's the latest stage on their long road to Western Europe. Most here are fleeing war and poverty in countries like Afghanistan and Syria. Above all, they want to reach Germany. Officials estimate that some 2,000 to 3,000 migrants manage to cross into Hungary via Serbia every day. It's a growing problem which is increasingly capturing the attention of European leaders across the continent. Here in the Serbian capital Belgrade, Prime Minister Aleksandar Vučić welcomed his Czech counterpart for talks which were dominated by the subject of refugees. We have been facing a huge wave of migrants. Since the beginning of the year, we have registered 115,000. When I say register, we are almost the first country on their way towards Western Europe who registers, makes a list of them, takes fingerprints and performs medical exams. So the number is 115,000 since the beginning of the year. At this moment, on the territory of Serbia, at 4 different points, there are around 7,800 people. We are doing our best according to our potential to help them. The massive flow of migrants into Europe has polarized opinion. German Chancellor Angela Merkel, whose country is likely to take more refugees than any other, has called for a fairer distribution of the new arrivals throughout Europe's 26-nation passport-free Schengen zone. Hungary, in contrast, is building a 3.5-meter high fence along its border with Serbia. The country's Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, has taken a hard line on what he says is a threat to European security, prosperity, and identity.
This case of problem, reaction, solution sure does generate a lot of headlines. And of course, there's lots of requests for international assistance, although it sure seems like they're the ones that cause the problems. That, of course, make for massive reactions of the regular-ass populace. And of course, it all leads towards the conclusion, the decision, the solution that the powers that shouldn't be have already had in mind for a long, long, long time. Again, we've been joking recently. They always tell you to live like there's no tomorrow, but you know they got long-time, multi-generational plans. Merkel, however, also called for harsher measures to be taken against asylum seekers if it was discovered they'd gone on holiday in their countries of origin, as recent reports have suggested. Taking holidays in the country in which you're being persecuted is not on. Chancellor also spoke about the issue of EU cooperation with Libya on refugees, which vehement criticism from human rights groups who say migrants in the largely lawless North African country have been subjected to many kinds of abuses. You can turn to New World Next Week for a story a couple of months ago about how, of course, Libya has now been turned into the new slave trade haven in another failed state and another mission accomplished. Merkel said she wanted to provide the Libyan Coast Guard with the necessary equipment to do its work, which under a recent agreement means trying to prevent migrants leaving Libyan territory. She said the EU-Libya deal aimed at preventing human trafficking, which had led to many deaths. But at the same time, she said the EU, of course, considers it to be of the greatest importance that the Libyan Coast Guard adheres to the rules of international law in dealing with refugees and migrants, as well as with non-governmental organizations. If doubts were to arise about Libya's behavior in this regard, the reports would be investigated, Merkel threatened. So there you go. Refugees must be distributed fairly. Everybody should own one. You're listening to The Morning Monarchy. Whoa, baby. It is Monday, August 28th, 2017. I'm James Evan Pilato from MediaMonarchy.com, coming to you, as always, from the Media Monarchy studios, and we are brought to you by you. 1 year ago, when he was still president, François Hollande scandalized the French establishment when it emerged that amid record unemployment, painful labor reforms, sliding economy, and the most serious social unrest in decades, I mean, hell, got all the trouble Kanye and Kim Ye and all those other idiots have had over there. I forget who it was, stuck in the riots there with Kanye a couple of years ago. It was like, you guys can keep them. So in the middle of all that, the French president's personal hairdresser was getting paid a gross salary by the state of $11,000 a month. That's even more than European Parliament members. As the media reported at the time, the hairdresser, who leaked the contract names only as Oliver B., set to earn £500,000 over the course of Hollande's current premiership in exchange for being available at every waking moment and signing a contract promising not to speak about his position. The fact that this was probably not the best way to spend French taxpayers' money was confirmed this past summer When Hollande's approval rating was so low, the socialist president didn't even run for re-election, a first in French history. Sadly, this was lost on Hollande's former Minister of Economy and current president, Emmanuel Macron, who failed to learn from the mistakes of his former boss. According to French magazine Le Point, French President Emmanuel Macron spent over $30,000 on makeup in his first 3 months as leader of the entire country.
Maybe he's born with it. Maybe it's over $30,000 of taxpayer money. French President Emmanuel Macron has been in office for 3 months, and a local magazine reports his personal makeup artist has charged the government around $31,000 during that time. The president's office says his makeup costs will be reduced in coming quarters. The pricey figure came as a, quote, matter of urgency, which seems a bit insulting to Macron's complexion. The revelation is unlikely to help the embattled president. His domestic approval has dropped over 30 points since taking office, in part because of unpopular budget cuts to the country's military. Recent French presidents haven't skimped on their beauty regimens. Nicolas Sarkozy's makeup costs more than $28,000 per quarter, and François Hollande's cost over $35,000 every 3 months.
What? Are you telling me that phony presidents' popularity ratings immediately plummet as soon as the phony TV advertising campaign / election season is over? Huh. As Politico adds, Macron's personal makeup artist put in 2 claims for payment, one for 10,000 euros, another for 16,000 euros for doing his makeup during travels and head of press conferences. When asked about this abuse of taxpayer funds, the Élysée Palace said in response, "We called in a contractor as a matter of urgency." Still, aides said that spending on makeup would be significantly reduced in the future. It gets better. It does get better. This is good stuff. According to the report, the amount spent was less than under Macron's predecessors. François Hollande, for example, was said to spend 30,000 euros per quarter on makeup, including the salary of a makeup artist, which means that in addition to his hairdresser, who ran just under 10,000 euros, the former French president spent over $250,000 in taxpayer funds every year to look good, quote unquote. One almost wonders why he left the French political scene with an approval rating in the single digits. As for Hollande's arguably even more vain predecessor, Nicolas Sarkozy, he spent slightly less on his makeup than Macron, only 8,000 euros a month. This news comes, as was just noted, Macron's popularity plunging. According to a new Harris poll, 37% of voters approve of the job Macron is doing, down from his high of 57% after his election in May. Ooh, a whole 57%. This, of course, will not help with his popularity. Macron's popularity collapse means that his fall from grace was even faster than that of some other presidents around the world, although oddly enough, one will not read much, if anything, about that particular collapse in the objective and unbiased Western press. It could be a problem for France, however, during the next election when that 1/3 of eligible voters who did not vote for either Macron or Le Pen finally decide to vote against the establishment candidate. It is not cheap to make somebody look honest. So that's Macron spending tons of money on makeup, which is just hilarious. It's just hilarious. And of course, that ties in with his weird-ass looking wife and all the weird... I mean, that could be a whole other story. We could talk about her and her weird dresses, and those are the sidebar headlines you'll see. Macron's wife wears weird same dress again and continues to flash legs. She's acting like, oh, I won't think of her name. Plus, I'm not allowed to mention that name on this special episode of Geopolitics. It is Monday, August 28th, 2017. I'm James Evan Pilato from MediaMonarchy.com, giving you a world news episode that is not talking about an elephant in the room, by special request, Geopolitics episode, as we now head back to Caracas, where authorities have shut down 2 radio stations that aired critical coverage of President Nicolas Maduro's government by refusing to renew their licenses. Does that sound familiar? It's not like they come and shoot you and kill you and burn your radio station down. No. They just bureaucrat you out of the biz. But this was all a broadcast executive announced it in Venezuela as the country staged more military exercises in defiance of new sanctions. Enza Carbone, president of the country's radio chamber, I like that, said late Friday in a statement that the National Telecommunications Commission did not renew the station's permits when they expired and ordered them to cease transmitting. The National Media Workers Union accused the government of taking arbitrary action and violating freedom of expression. The closures came less than 48 hours after the commission ordered cable providers to remove the signal of Colombian TV stations Caracol and RCN. Maduro had sharply criticized foreign news coverage of the country and its months-long political crisis. About 900,000 people, including soldiers and members of civilian militias, were expected to take part in the 2 days of martial drills that just happened basically over this last weekend. The drills, I believe, are the 26th and 27th. Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino Lopez inaugurated the exercise Saturday at a National Guard facility in eastern Caracas, where dozens of snipers practiced their aim. So we continue the King Kill meme. Maduro has been accused of imposing a dictatorship after the recent installation of an all-powerful constitutional assembly that's targeted political opponents and taken over lawmaking powers from the opposition-controlled Congress. Other countries have not ruled out the military option for Venezuela. Critics call the assembly's creation a blatant authoritarian power grab, while Maduro allies argue it offers a way out of the country's political and economic crisis.
The Venezuelan government has started the close down of the first of 34 radio stations. Employees are protesting what they say is a move designed to strengthen the power of the country's socialist president.
The Venezuelan government has come up with a list of 34 radio stations it claims to have failed to comply with regulations. The first of 34 radio stations ordered shut down by the government went off the air on Saturday, but station employees say they will continue transmitting. Government broadcasting watchdog Conatel delivered an order to CNB Radio in Caracas before dawn to stop transmitting by 8 a.m.
We are satisfied they are the first 34 stations when we, the national government, the revolutionary government, made the decision to democratize the radio spectrum, to end the media estate. What we are saying seriously is that we are not playing.
But critics contend the crackdown is arbitrary and the owners were not given the right to a proper defense. Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez and his supporters say they are waging a media war against private news companies that discredit Venezuela. Hundreds of surprised CNB employees and government critics gathered at the company CNB's headquarters in downtown Caracas on Saturday to protest the shutdown.
We don't expect anything from this measure. It is an illegal measure. It is a measure that attacks liberty. It is not a legal measure, but a political measure, and we are here on fighting feet. We are going to continue arriving with our voices to the homes of all the Venezuelans that have followed CNB all these years.
As part of his drive to remake Venezuela as a socialist country, Chavez has vastly expanded the number of publicly owned television and radio stations since he took office in 1999. In 2007, Chavez did not renew the license for a widely watched private TV station, RCTV, that was a persistent critic of the government.
The alternative media, Jerry. That's where you hear the truth.
You're listening to Media Monarchy with James Evan Pilato.
Damn, Skippy, you're listening to The Morning Monarchy. It's the last Monday in August. It's August 28th, 2017, and I'm coming to you, as always, from the Media Monarchy studios. I'm James Evan Pilato, your host, a webmaster, DJ, and so much more. Oh, whoops. You guys, did I accidentally play a 8-year-old video about Venezuela that sounds exactly like what's happening right now, except for the part where they said Hugo Chavez? Did I accidentally do that? Whoops. Past is prologue. Venezuela shuts down radio stations. August 3rd, 2009. Now, as sidebar, it's still always kind of amazing now at this point that YouTube is over a decade old when you see videos that say uploaded 8 years ago, 10 years ago. Whoa. To greater democracy in Venezuela, the empire responds with more aggression, Padrino Lopez said, promising that armed forces will support the government in standing up to sanctions. We've been following the situation in Venezuela, and again, that's why we say past is prologue over and over and over again, because these situations play out seemingly over and over and over again. I'm looking at the tweets right now, I'm looking at what's going on with fights and protests all around the world. In some ways, we've said it before and we'll say it again, the only winning move is not to play. Let's continue our geopolitics news, my friends. And again, all these stories you can find using hashtag geopolitics. A horrifying image of a schoolboy being dragged to a violent death in a dirty alleyway has finally galvanized the Philippines against a brutal state-led war on drugs that's already killed at least 12,500 people in the last year alone. For a nation now largely immune to the bloodied corpses of alleged small-time drugs users and dealers dumped on the streets, the graphic reports of the final moments of Kian De Los Santos, 17, who was allegedly shot 3 times by undercover cops, has been too much to bear. His killing last week has united the public, senior politicians, and even the Catholic Church into the most significant sweep of mass protests since President Rodrigo Duterte pushed for a savage crackdown on drugs after his election last June. More than 12,500 casualties have been killed by masked assassins. An estimated 3,500 have been killed in shootouts with the cops, which officers of course claim were self-defense. In the case of De Los Santos, the police initially claimed he had fired first. But their story, of course, contradicted by witnesses and, fortunately, CCTV footage that showed the teenager being dragged down alleyways into a dead-end corner where he was asked to run with a gun and then, of course, shot when he did. He was heard, "Please can I go home? I have school tomorrow."
We believe that Tokhang, all cases of Tokhang, it's not just the case of Kian, should be reviewed. Because if the police are inconsistent with the case of Kian, it also applies to the previous cases, wherein the police summarily dismissed concerns about extrajudicial killing and defended the actions of the police.
It is very clear that since last year, the war on drugs has turned into a war against the poor. Thousands dead, most of them coming from urban poor communities. The president wants to rule by spreading fear, and the Filipino people will resist this emerging tyranny represented by the Duterte presidency.
De Los Santos is one of 81 people killed last week during mass police raids and was the bloodiest period of the drugs war so far. His bullet-ridden, semi-naked body was found in a fetal position with a gun in his hands. Speaking to Rappler News, his parents, Saldi and Lorenza, said he was a well-behaved kid who loved watching YouTube and helped the family shop. His only vice was eating cheese-flavored crisps. On the night he died, his father gave him a prescient warning to come home early. You know how it is on our street, it could be dangerous. Now, this rather emotional article from The Telegraph, Duterte faces nationwide revolt over drugs war after killing of schoolboy sparks outrage, should be a reminder of any group or any organization that claims the might and the right of murder for what they believe is right. If this weren't a special edition of Geopolitics, you bet your sweet booty we'd be talking about people using violence right now in our midst. And we reject it. Let's continue our world news as we head off now to Guatemala, where President Jimmy Morales on Sunday appeared to defy a court ruling that he not expel the head of an influential UN anti-graft unit investigating his campaign financing, of course deepening an international crisis in the Central American nation. Earlier on Sunday, the president said Ivan Velasquez, head of the International Commission Against Impunity in Guatemala, or the CICIG, must leave the country immediately. Hours later, the nation's top court suspended the decision. Let's see if that kind of sounds familiar. The one being investigated fires the investigator, and now the courts have said, hey, I don't know, you should do that. In a nearly 4-minute address, in which he, of course, was flanked by Guatemalan flags because nationalism rules, Morales accused Velasquez of exceeding his mandate. He said the decision to expel him was a matter of foreign policy and therefore the responsibility of the executive, not the courts. In the charged atmosphere, hundreds of Guatemalans took to the streets mostly to defend Velasquez outside his offices and in the center of Guatemala City, although some groups came out in support of the president and against foreign interference. Velasquez, a veteran prosecutor who previously investigated drug cartels and paramilitary groups in his home country, which I would imagine would put a giant target on you. His home country in Colombia, he remained in his office on Sunday afternoon where he was meeting with supportive foreign ambassadors. In its ruling, the country's highest civil court said the foreign, defense, and interior ministers should not participate in removing Velasquez from the country. 2 constitutional experts consulted by Reuters, which is where this article's coming from, said the prez would be committing a crime if he does not obey the court. With powers to prepare crime and corruption cases, CICIG was instrumental in removing Guatemala's former president, Otto Perez Molina, from office in 2015 after identifying him as a key player in an alleged multi-million-dollar corruption racket. AKA government business as usual. Morales, a former comedian, incorrectly noted here on Reuters that he came to power in 2016. He was actually elected in 2015. Thanks, Reuters. I double-checked that even, because I was looking at pieces, and I had the old gray lady, and I had Rothschild's Reuters. The old gray lady actually got it right. He was elected in 2015. But they both have it right that he is a former comedian. Again, see if that seems familiar. It's just, I don't know. It's just an unending parade of people constantly being tricked into voting against their own best interests. Well, you voted for it, dummy. Morales' declaration that Velázquez was persona non grata came days after CICIG said the president should be investigated over alleged illicit funding during his election campaign. CICIG is investigating some $800,000 in allegedly unexplained contributions to Morales' campaign. Morales has denied any wrongdoing. CICIG has been a thorn in the comedian president's side since it started the graft probe focused on his elder brother and one of his sons. See, again, they're multi-generational gangsters. That's how this works. Many politicians in Guatemala consider the foreign-led body, which is unusual among UN bodies for its powers to bring cases to prosecutors, to be a violation of national sovereignty, which is a whole other entire discussion we haven't even really broached in these conversations. Oh, UN, please help us. Oh, United Nations board of this or that. Please come save us. I mean, you're only the ones who help facilitate all these problems, reactions, and solutions. Let's get our last couple of headlines under geopolitics, my friends. And it was noted, I believe, as the reply to the tweets, maybe? No, I don't see it. But I'll just mention it to you right here. This is the sort of case that actually, in a lot of countries and in a lot of situations, we would be lucky if this were the case. I wish our politicians would do less. But now, in the case of former Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott, well, you know, it's Australian phobia.
So how long would you typically hang out here?
Well, there was one famous occasion when Peter Costello, Kevin Andrews and I hung out rather a long time here. The night that the then Rudd government was trying to bring in measures to deal with the GFC.
Oh.
And I think quite a few bottles of wine were consumed by the three of us. Peter was close to leaving at that stage, and I think all of us were in a mellow and reflective mood, and so the reflections went on for longer and later than they should have, and the impact was rather greater than it should have been.
So is that
I think
the
I
same?
famously slept through several divisions.
Yeah, I was going to ask if that was the same night. The story was that you repaired, possibly for further reflection and introspection, to the couch in your room and could not be roused to...
It was a late night sitting against all OH&S rules, as you can imagine. So no, I lay down, and next thing I knew, it was morning.
Did you get in trouble?
Yep, I was chastised by the whip, as indeed I should have been, because you do have to be available whenever the bells ring.
Australia's Prime Minister confirmed Friday that his predecessor, who you heard right there, and inter-party rival Tony Abbott, had once been too drunk to vote in Parliament, an incident that's been a poorly kept secret in political circles for 8 years. Current Aussie Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull told Melbourne Radio 3AW on Friday, so much Friday, that he was opposition leader in 2009 when Abbott was incapable of voting against government legislation to massively increase economic stimulus spending. I was disappointed, but you got to move on with these things. We could only wish that our powers that shouldn't be were too drunk to do anything, because generally speaking, when they get together to do stuff, it's going to be against us. Now, because this is a special geopolitics edition of Your Morning Monarchy, we do have some stories that may have been slotted into other days of the week. As you might know, each day of the week, a different area of the news. Monday's World News. Tuesday is Cyberspace War, technology news. Wednesday is Food World Order, food, health, and environment news. Thursday is the weird, occult, underbelly, of chaos. And actually, our story right here may have actually fit in this week, rather on other weeks in Holy Hexes, but on this week, we're going to file it in on this geopolitics. At least 28 people have been killed in India as violent protests erupted after a court convicted a self-styled God man of raping 2 of his female followers.
At least 28 people are dead after violent protests over the rape conviction of a popular religious leader in northern India. Gurmeet Ram Rahim Singh, who claims to have millions of followers, was found guilty of raping 2 women 15 years ago. Now, these are the latest pictures from the northern town of Panchkula. Thousands of his devotees rioted after the verdict was announced there, setting fire to vehicles, buildings and railway stations. Now, security forces have responded by using live ammunition. The violence has also spread to other parts of northern India, including the capital Delhi, from where Justin Rowlatt has just sent this report.
This train was set on fire by an angry mob here in the Indian capital Delhi. Elsewhere in the city, buses have been torched. Now, the Guru has an absolutely enormous following. He claims 50 million people, and the fear is that violence could spread. Now, the epicenter of all of this is Panchkula, a town in the North Indian state of Haryana. That's where the court that convicted the Guru was being held, and tens of thousands of his followers gathered there to offer their support. Now, after the conviction for these 2 rapes was handed down, they clashed with the police. Throwing stones, the police responded with tear gas and water cannon, lathi charges. Lathis are the bamboo sticks the police use to control crowds here in India. When that did not pacify the crowd, they then fired live ammunition.
Justin Rowlatt there. Well, let's go live to Delhi and talk to Sanjoy Majumdar. Sanjoy, a sudden and very violent reaction to this verdict. What is the latest that you're hearing on the violence?
Well, Karen, since those clashes began several hours ago, this was soon after the verdict was announced in the town of Panchkula, north of where I am in the capital Delhi, and those clashes took place. The police, after finding it very difficult to regain control, eventually gave way to the army. Now, the army's been deployed around Panchkula, and we understand that have slowly started regaining control of those areas around the courthouse where the verdict was declared. But since then, of course, the riots have spread across a number of towns in the states of Punjab and Haryana, north of Delhi. A couple of attacks also reported from the capital, Delhi. But again, since then, it's quietened down a bit. There's a heavy deployment of police and security personnel across all these 3 areas, the 2 states I mentioned, as well as Delhi. There have been appeals for calm by senior ministers. The Prime Minister has been briefed on the latest situation. And as for the man at the center of it all, Gurmeet Ram Rahim Singh, the spiritual leader who was convicted of rape, he was transported by helicopter from the court to a prison where he's being kept until a sentence is pronounced. We believe that'll take place on Monday.
Sanjoy, it's not as if authorities were taken by surprise by this. They had been expecting some kind of violent reaction to the verdict.
Yes, that's right. Ahead of the verdict, they had deployed something like 15,000 police and security personnel. That included armed police in and around the courthouse, anticipating violence. But already there is a lot of criticism for the government for failing to actually prevent his supporters from gathering there in the first place. Something like 200,000 of his supporters had gathered in and around Panchkula in the days leading up to this verdict. When he arrived in court earlier today, he arrived in a convoy of 100 vehicles, all of them carrying his supporters. And again, the questions that are being raised is why was this allowed to take place? Because if they were able to control access to the town and prevent his supporters from gathering, perhaps some of this violence could have been contained. They did respond by suspending mobile internet services, but a lot of that came too late because people were already on the ground. And so when the verdict was announced, they simply responded by violence.
Sanjoy, thank you very much. Sanjoy Majumdar there in Delhi. We will be talking a little later in this programme about who is Gurmeet Ram Rahim Singh.
Well, you'll have to hit the show notes for more on that, because, of course, religious leaders do it literally and politicians do it figuratively. And the question, too, did they let it happen on purpose? What? Are you implying that police agencies might let riots and protests get violent on purpose? Seb, that just sounds crazy. Our fast final story on this geopolitics episode of Your Morning Monarchy segues into cyberspace war as the rise of military killer robots is almost inevitable, and any attempt at an international ban will struggle to stop an arms race. This, according to a former defense chief responsible for predicting future warfare. Potential advantages of artificially intelligent war machines that can make decisions, learn, and open fire without human control will see countries face pressure to adopt the technology despite ethical misgivings. General Sir Richard Barons told the Telegraph that a preemptive international ban called for by technology luminaries such as Elon Musk last week is only likely to be flouted by unscrupulous nations. The retired senior officer spoke after more than 100 technology leaders wrote an open letter calling on the United Nations to outlaw so-called lethal autonomous weapons. Prepare for the rise of killer robots. That's the way we wrap up your geopolitics episode. All of those stories will be included in the show notes. And again, I implore you to check out the hashtag. Just click on geopolitics and you will see all the other stories brought to you by you from all around the world. We're going to go out with brand new music from Scotland's mighty Mogwai. Brand new music. They've got a new record coming out, and I've got a non-album track for you. It's a rager. I guess Mogwai's just been picking up speed and picking up power as they go by, becoming more and more mighty. So we're going to go out with a little song called Eternal Panther from Mogwai in just a few minutes. But of course, let's take a look at this day in history, my friends. It'll be a little truncated today because this is a special geopolitics episode. Monday, August 28th, 1833. Oh, well, I can't say that that was a Monday in 1833. August 28th, 1833. The Slavery Abolition Act of 1833 receives royal assent, abolishing slavery through most of the British Empire. August 28th, 1916, Germany declares war on Romania. That same day, Italy declares war on Germany, because it was the Great War. August 28th, 1924, the Georgian opposition stages the August Uprising against the Soviet Union. And we jump pretty much into contemporary times then. August 28th, 1988, the Ramstein air show disaster. 3 aircraft of the Frecce Tricolore demonstration team collide and the wreckage falls into the crowd. 75 killed, 346 seriously injured on this day in Germany. August 28th, 1990, Iraq declares Kuwait to be its newest province. They're ours. That didn't go so well. And on this day, August 28th, 1996, after 4 years of separation, Charles, Prince of Wales, and heir to the British throne, and his wife, Princess Diana, formally divorce on this day.
The marriage of Lady Diana Spencer to Prince Charles on the 29th of July 1981 was witnessed by the world.
I, Diana Francis.
I, Diana Francis.
Take thee, Charles Philip Arthur George.
Take thee, Philip Charles Arthur George.
To my wedded husband.
To my wedded husband.
To have and to hold.
To have and to hold.
From this day forward.
From this day forward.
According to God's holy law.
According to God's holy law.
And thereto I give thee my troth.
And thereto I give thee my troth.
But 15 years on, the marriage lies in tatters, the vows broken.
It is announced from Buckingham Palace that with regret, the Prince and Princess of Wales have decided to separate. This decision has been reached amicably, and they will both to continue to participate fully in the upbringing of their children.
The Prince and Princess of Wales met this afternoon in private at St James's Palace, and the result of that meeting was that the Princess of Wales, with huge sadness and regret, agreed to Prince Charles's request for a divorce.
The disintegration of the royal marriage is more than a personal tragedy. It strikes at the core of the monarchy, what the modern royal family represents. The royal family has for years been the source of the monarchy's strength and resilience. But now it's the family that's been exposed as the monarchy's Achilles heel. And to survive, many believe the monarchy must change. She was the youngest daughter of an earl who worked in a kindergarten. In the eyes of the public, an innocent, uncomplicated English rose.
How well are you coping with all the press attention? Well, as you can see, you can tell.
But behind the public euphoria lay deep-seated problems that were to surface almost from the first day of the marriage.
Diana had been very affected by her parents' separation. Her father remarried a woman that none of them, particularly Diana, liked. So it was a very unhappy child in their respect.
21 years ago today, the royal couple would divorce, Charles and Diana. And about a year later, we also know what happens next. Finally, on this day in history, August 28th, 1997, the first Genesis album in 6 years was premiered live in an Album Network radio special and simultaneously webcast at Atlantic-Records.com. That's pretty early. That's 97. Good job, Genesis. Hey, celebrating birthdays today again. It'll be a short list because this is a special geopolitics edition. Celebrating birthdays today, French actor, singer, producer Charles Boyer. Also, Hugh Cornwell. He's a singer, songwriter, guitarist for the Stranglers. And I'm going to mangle his name a little bit. Ai Weiwei. He's, of course, Chinese sculptor and activist. He's got movies and stuff. I think he likes cats, too. It's also Shania Twain's birthday and Florence Welch, who you might know from Her and Her Machine. Now, here's the other special part. Not only is this a special geopolitics episode that didn't mention once one big giant elephant in the room, I think we pulled this one off. I can't wait for the emails from people like, what was missing from that episode? I don't get it. I also have so much new music on backlog, I wasn't able to prep any of it over the weekend, so guess what? This week, no new music. It'll just be Classics Week as we close out August on your Morning Monarchy and your Pump Up the Volume. In keeping with that spirit, as we wrap up this episode, my friends, we got brand new music from the mighty Mogwai. They were probably one of the loudest concerts I've ever seen in my life. You know, when you feel your clothes moving and you kind of think, this probably isn't good for me. I probably shouldn't be subjecting myself to this much sound. But they were fantastic. They have a new record coming out. I believe it's coming out this Friday. It's called Every Country's Son, and they've already released a couple of singles. One of them is called Party in the Dark, but we're going to listen to the ragin' 2.5-minute B-side called Eternal Panther. Brand new music from Mogwai as we wrap up this very special geopolitics episode of your Morning Monarchy. It's been Monday, August 28th, 2017, and I've been James Evan Pilato, your host, webmaster, DJ, and so much more from MediaMonarchy.com. Thanking you so much for listening, my friends. Hope you'll spread the word about Media Monarchy. And I'm reminding you, as always, like our buddy Jello Biafra says, don't hate the media, become the media. Take care.
You're listening to Media Monarchy with James Evan Pilato. Since 2005, Media Monarchy has covered the real news about politics, health, technology, and the occult, all remixed with music and media that matters. Go to MediaMonarchy.com/support and become a monthly subscriber so you can help keep independent, non-commercial, alternative media going and growing. Thanks.